I was sent to approve a construction site because if I did not sign that paper, an entire town would lose its only source of income. It was a normal inspection, just me, a hard hat, and a clipboard at 7:30 in the morning. Then a young worker collapsed near the scaffolding, and everyone told me not to stop walking. I noticed the gas monitor taped shut, blinking red under dust. I kept quiet, knowing that everything I believed about doing the right thing was about to fall apart. If I did not sign that inspection report by the end of the week, more than 2,000 people in this town would lose their jobs. That was the first thing the regional office told me when they put the file on my desk. No raised voices, no threats, just a calm sentence, delivered like a weather update. I had been an infrastructure safety inspector for 16 years, long enough to recognize when a decision was already framed as a moral trap. Sign and live with the consequences later. Refuse and become the reason everyone remembers when the layoffs start. I arrived in Harbor Point on a gray Monday morning in late March. The town sat along a thin strip of the California coast, wedged between steep bluffs and an ocean that never fully rested. It used to be a fishing town, then a shipping town, then nothing for a long time. Now it was being reborn as something they called a coastal eco-resort, a phrase that looked good on brochures and investor decks. Hotels, villas, a private marina, all rising where rusted warehouses and abandoned piers once stood. I parked my government-issued sedan 2 blocks from the site and walked the rest of the way. I always did that in small towns. It gave me a few minutes to read the place before anyone started selling me their version of it. The air smelled of salt and diesel. Gulls screamed overhead. Storefronts were half open, half boarded up, like the town itself had not decided whether to wake up or go back to sleep. At the edge of the construction zone, a temporary fence wrapped the property in orange mesh. A banner hung across it, flapping in the wind. Harbor Point Renewal Project, bringing jobs back home. Someone had taped a paper sign under it that said, "Thank you," in thick black marker. I checked my watch. 7:30. Right on schedule. A young man in a white hard hat waved when he saw me. He was clean-shaven, eager, the kind of person who still believed being early meant something. He introduced himself as Ethan, Site Operations Coordinator. He reached for my hand, then hesitated, glanced at my badge, and smiled wider than necessary. "We were told you might want to use the south entrance," he said. I looked past him. The south entrance was a narrow opening near the service road, half hidden behind stacked pallets. The main gate, wide and newly paved, stood empty 30 yards away. "Why?" I asked. He shrugged, light and casual. "Less foot traffic. Safer." I nodded and followed him without comment. It was a small thing, too small to challenge, but I noted it anyway. Inside, the site hummed with activity. Cranes rotated slowly against the low sky. Concrete trucks idled in a line, engines rumbling like impatient animals. Workers moved in, practiced paths, reflective vests flashing between steel frames. Everything looked efficient, controlled, the kind of place that wanted to be seen as professional. Ethan handed me a hard hat and safety glasses. I accepted them, slipped them on, and pulled my clipboard from my bag. The checklist was familiar. Foundation stability, environmental safeguards, air quality monitors, emergency access points. I had reviewed the reports on the flight in. On paper, the project was clean enough to make me uneasy. As we walked, Ethan talked about how his father had lost his job when the cannery closed, about how his sister was finally able to move back home, about how the town council had fought for years to get investors to look their way. He did not ask me to do anything directly. He did not need to. Every sentence was a reminder of the weight attached to my signature. We reached the western edge of the site, where the ground dropped toward the water. This was the most sensitive area, geologically and environmentally. I stopped and knelt, pressing my gloved hand against the exposed soil. It felt damp, too damp for the dry season. I frowned and made a note. "Drainage issues?" Ethan asked. "Possibly," I said. "I will know more after I check the monitors." He hesitated, then pointed toward a scaffolded structure nearby. "They are installed over there." I walked toward it. The metal steps clanged under my boots. At the top, I saw the first monitor mounted to a steel pole. The casing was dusty, like everything else, but the screen beneath caught my eye. A strip of gray tape ran across the lower half, partially covering the display. "That should not be taped," I said. Ethan laughed softly. "It kept flashing, distracting the guys." I leaned closer and peeled the tape back with my fingernail. The screen blinked once, then steadied. Red numbers glowed beneath the grime. I did not react right away. I had learned that sudden reactions made people defensive. Instead, I straightened, took a slow breath, and looked around. Workers were moving nearby, carrying rebar, shouting measurements to each other. No one was wearing a respirator. "When did it start flashing?" I asked. Ethan shifted his weight. "This morning, I think. Maybe earlier." I nodded again and wrote another note. Still no confrontation, still gathering facts. We moved on. I checked emergency exits, fire suppression units, ventilation fans. Everything else appeared to be in order. Almost too much so. Like a stage set dressed to pass inspection. Near 10 o'clock, we paused for a water break. I stood near a stack of pipes, sipping from my bottle, watching the site. That was when I heard the shout. Someone yelled for help, a voice sharp with fear. I turned in time to see a young woman stumble near the scaffolding. She dropped to one knee, then collapsed fully onto the gravel. Tools clattered as people rushed toward her. Someone knelt, calling her name. Someone else waved for a medic. I moved forward instinctively, but Ethan stepped into my path. "She gets lightheaded sometimes," he said quickly. The sun. It was overcast. Cold, even. I looked at the woman on the ground. Her face was pale, lips tinged blue. Her chest rose too fast, too shallow. "Has she been cleared to work today?" I asked. "Yes," he said, "too fast. She will be fine." A site medic arrived, knelt, checked her pulse. He did not look up at me. I watched for another few seconds, then turned away. Not because I believed him, because I understood the rules of this moment. If I shut the site down now, everything would explode. Questions, calls, pressure. It was not that I did not care. It was that caring without proof was not enough. As we walked back toward the office trailer, I noticed the monitor again, blinking red beneath a fresh strip of tape. Someone had already covered it back up. I said nothing. Inside the trailer, Ethan poured me coffee from a stained machine and slid a folder across the desk. Final documentation, ready for review. He sat across from me, hands folded, trying not to look hopeful. I flipped through the pages. Everything was in order. Two in order. I closed the folder and looked at him. "I will need a full environmental data export," I said. "Raw files." His smile faltered, just slightly. "Of course," he said. "I will get that. Later." As he stood to leave, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from an unknown number. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be." I stared at the screen for a moment, then slipped the phone away. Outside, the cranes kept turning. The ocean kept moving. And somewhere beneath the concrete and steel, something was wrong. I did not know yet how much it would cost me to say it out loud. I did not leave the site right away. I sat alone in the office trailer after Ethan stepped out, listening to the thin walls vibrate with the sound of machinery. The coffee had gone cold in my hands. I stared at the inspection folder without opening it again, because I already knew what it would say. Everything complied. Everything passed. Everything was safe, as long as you trusted the paper more than your eyes. I packed my bag slowly, the way you do when you are trying to think without admitting it. Outside, the medic helped the young woman to her feet. She leaned on his shoulder, nodded when someone spoke to her, and walked away under her own power. That was how incidents disappeared. No sirens, no reports, just movement away from the center of attention. I drove to the motel the county had booked for me, a low building near the highway with peeling blue paint and a flickering vacancy sign. It was the kind of place that smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet, but it was clean enough, and it did not ask questions. I checked in under my name, signed the clipboard, and took the key without making conversation. My room faced the parking lot. I set my bag down, kicked off my boots, and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence felt heavy after the constant noise of the site. I pulled out my phone and opened the text again. Do not make this harder than it needs to be. No name. No number I recognized. I deleted it, then immediately regretted that I had not taken a screenshot. Old habit. Evidence first, reaction later. I told myself I would not make that mistake again. I showered, letting the hot water beat against my shoulders until the grit of the day washed down the drain. As I dried off, I caught my reflection in the mirror. 46. Lines around my eyes I did not remember earning. Hair pulled back tight, the way I always wore it on inspections. Practical, neutral, invisible, when possible. That night, I did not sleep much. Trucks roared past on the highway. My mind replayed the moment when Ethan stepped in front of me, blocking my path. The way his voice had rushed, not angry, just afraid. I had seen that fear before, in other places, other projects, fear of being the one who slowed everything down. In the morning, I drove into town instead of back to the site. Harbor Point was small enough that you could cross it in 15 minutes, but early light gave it a softer edge. Cafes opened their doors. A hardware store owner swept the sidewalk. People waved at each other like they were keeping count. I stopped at a diner on the corner of Main and Harbor. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and frying bacon. I slid into a booth by the window and ordered eggs and toast. The waitress poured my coffee without asking and called me Hun like she had known me for years. You here for the project? She asked. I nodded. Inspection. Her smile tightened. Hope you like it. We need it. I did not answer. I stirred my coffee and watched a group of men in work boots take a table near the counter. They laughed loudly, slapped each other on the back, argued about baseball. Normal. Good. I understood why people wanted this to work. I had grown up in a place just like this, watching opportunity pack its bags and leave one business at a time. After breakfast, I walked down to the harbor. The old pier was still there, weathered and closed off with warning signs. Beyond it, the water stretched gray and endless. My father used to take me out on a small boat when I was a kid. He taught me how to read the surface, how to spot changes in current, how to know when something underneath was shifting even if you could not see it yet. I stood there longer than I meant to, until my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. You will get the data today. Just relax. I typed a response, then erased it. Instead, I put the phone away and headed back to my car. By the time I returned to the motel, an email was waiting in my inbox. Subject line, Environmental Data Export. Attached was a compressed file, large enough to look legitimate. I downloaded it to my laptop and opened it at the small desk by the window. At first glance, the files were complete. Air quality readings, soil samples, groundwater levels, everything neatly labeled, time-stamped, formatted, exactly the way my department required. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment, letting out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. Then I started checking the metadata. Years in this job had trained me to distrust anything that arrived too easily. I clicked through file properties, scanned creation dates, compared timestamps. Most of them lined up. A few did not. Subtle differences. Minutes where there should have been seconds. Gaps filled with duplicated data. I pulled up the raw readings from the monitor I had seen on site. According to the file, it had never exceeded safe thresholds. Not once. No red flags. No alerts. I stared at the screen, then opened a second window and pulled up the photo I had taken that morning. The monitor blinking red under the tape. The numbers burned into my memory even if I had not captured them perfectly. I zoomed in on the image. The glare made it hard to read, but I could make out enough. Enough to know the reading was not just slightly high, it was dangerous. Someone had edited the data. Carefully, professionally. The kind of work done by people who knew exactly what inspectors looked for. I saved copies of everything to an external drive and shut the laptop. My hands were steady, but my stomach felt hollow. This was no longer about a missed detail or an overworked coordinator cutting corners. This was intentional. Organized. That afternoon, Ethan called. Did you get the files? He asked. Yes, I said. Everything you need? For now. There was a pause on the line. Good, he said. That is good. I could hear voices behind him, laughter, the normal sound of people who believed the future was on their side. "Listen," he continued, lowering his voice. "The town council is holding a small welcome thing tonight. Nothing formal, just drinks. They would love it if you came by. Put faces to names." I looked at the external drive on the desk. "I will think about it." "You should," he said quickly. "It would mean a lot." After the call ended, I sat there for a long time. I knew what the welcome thing was. A way to soften me, to surround me with stories and gratitude before I had to decide whether to be the villain. I did not go. Instead, I drove back toward the site as the sun started to dip. I parked farther away this time and walked the perimeter alone. From the bluff above, I could see the shape of the foundation cutting into the earth, straight lines where the land wanted curves. The ocean beyond it, darkening as clouds rolled in. I thought about the woman who had collapsed. I thought about my father, about the way he had trusted the water until the day it turned on him. I thought about the sentence the regional office had used so casually: 2,000 jobs. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "You are overthinking this. Everyone benefits if you sign." I did not delete the message this time. I saved it. When I returned to the motel, there was an envelope taped to my door. No name. Inside was an invitation printed on heavy paper. "Welcome to Harbor Point," along with a handwritten note. "We take care of our own here." I sat on the bed, invitation in one hand, phone in the other, and finally allowed myself to admit what I had been avoiding all day. This was not going to end with a simple report. Whatever decision I made next was going to cost me something. The next morning, the wind came in hard from the ocean. I could hear it before I opened my eyes, pushing against the motel windows in long, uneven gusts. It felt like the kind of day when things refused to stay where you put them. I dressed early and drove back toward the site without checking my phone. I already knew there would be messages. I did not want to read them yet. I needed to see the place again, in daylight, with my head clear. This time, no one waved me through the south entrance. The gate was unmanned. I parked near the edge of the road and walked in alone, my boots crunching on gravel. The site felt different without someone narrating it for me. Louder, rougher, less polished. Workers were already spread across the foundation. The cranes were moving faster than the day before, swinging loads of steel into place. I noticed that the woman who had collapsed was not there. I asked a man tightening bolts near the scaffolding if he knew where she was. "She took the day off," he said without looking up. "Probably sick." I thanked him and walked on. I went straight to the monitor. The tape was still there, thicker now, wrapped around the casing like a bandage. I peeled it back again, slower this time. The screen flickered, then settled. The numbers spiked almost immediately. I stood there, staring at it, until my chest felt tight. This was not borderline. This was not a fluke. The levels were high enough that, if sustained, they would explain dizziness, nausea, collapse. High enough that, by regulation, work should have stopped. I reached into my bag and pulled out my camera. I took photos from multiple angles, making sure the readings were visible, the location identifiable. I recorded a short video, panning from the scaffold to the monitor, to the workers moving nearby without protective gear. When I finished, I replaced the tape exactly the way I found it. As I turned away, someone cleared their throat behind me. Ethan stood a few feet back, hands in his pockets, helmet tucked under his arm. His smile was gone. "You should not do that," he said quietly. I met his eyes. It should not be happening. He glanced around, checking who might be listening. "You are making a problem where there does not need to be one." "A worker collapsed," I said. "The monitor is showing dangerous levels." "He did is. She will be fine," he said again, but this time there was no confidence behind it. "We have engineers, environmental consultants, people who know more than you." I almost laughed. "I am the person they hire when they want to know what the truth costs." That landed harder than I expected. His jaw tightened. For a moment, he looked very young. "You do not understand this town," he said. "You come in with your rules and your forms, and you do not see what is at stake." End quote. "I see exactly what is at stake," I said. "That is the problem." He stepped closer. If you shut this down, people will lose their homes. Their kids will leave. Stores will close. All because of a monitor reading that will probably settle once we pour the next layer. Probably, I repeated. He exhaled sharply and shook his head. You think you are saving people. You are not. You are hurting them. Before I could answer, a shout went up near the foundation pit. Someone yelled a name. Another voice shouted for help. We both turned. A man near the edge of the excavation stumbled backward, dropped his tool, and fell to one knee. He tried to stand and failed. Two others grabbed his arms, pulling him away from the pit. He was breathing hard, eyes unfocused. This time, there was no attempt to block my view. I walked over, knelt beside him. What happened? I asked. Got dizzy, he said, slurring slightly. Just for a second. I looked at his hands. They were trembling. Has this happened before? I asked. He hesitated, glanced at Ethan, then looked away. Maybe. The medic arrived again, face tight. He checked the man's vitals, whispered something to him, helped him stand. We are taking him off rotation, the medic said, not meeting my eyes. For how long? I asked. As long as it takes. I stood up slowly. I am ordering a temporary stop in this section, I said, until we verify air quality and ventilation. Ethan's head snapped toward me. You cannot do that. I can, I said. And I am. He pulled me aside, his voice low and urgent. If you issue a stop work order, it triggers a review. Investors will hear about it. The council will hear about it. That is how it works. You do not want that, he said. Trust me. I thought of the edited data files, the taped monitor, the texts from unknown numbers. No, I said. You do not want that. I walked back toward the trailer, already reaching for my clipboard. That was when my phone rang. A real number this time. Local, I answered. This is Mayor Collins, a man said. His voice was smooth, practiced. I hear there is a small misunderstanding on site. I looked at Ethan, who was watching me with open panic. I would not call it small, I said. We would love to clear it up, the mayor continued. Why do you come by my office this afternoon? We can talk it through. I am in the middle of an inspection, I said. Of course, he said. But this is a community matter. I closed my eyes for a second. I will come by after I finish here. Excellent, he said. We appreciate your flexibility. The call ended. Ethan let out a breath like he had been holding it all day. See, he said, this is how things get handled. I did not respond. I issued the stop order for that section anyway, my pen pressing hard enough to tear the paper. By the time I left the site, word had already spread. Workers stood in small clusters, talking in low voices. Some looked angry, some looked scared. A few looked relieved. At the mayor's office, the walls were covered in photos. Ribbon cuttings, smiling groups. The same banner I had seen at the site hung behind his desk. Mayor Collins offered me a seat and a bottle of water. I declined both. He leaned back in his chair. You have to understand, he said. We have been waiting for this chance for a long time. I understand, I said. That does not change the readings. He smiled. Data can be interpreted. Not this data. He folded his hands. If you escalate this, it becomes political. It already is. His smile faded. I am trying to protect this town. So am I. He studied me for a long moment. What would it take for you to be comfortable signing off? I felt something hard settle in my chest. The truth, I said, and for people to stop pretending it does not matter. Ivan, no. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows. I realized then that the collapse I had been waiting for was not coming from the ground. It was coming from the way everyone around me had decided that some risks were acceptable, as long as they belonged to someone else. I left the mayor's office with the uneasy feeling that I had just stepped into something much larger than a construction dispute. The hallway outside was quiet, lined with framed photographs of Harbor Point in different decades, fishing boats, parades, groundbreaking ceremonies that promised renewal and never quite delivered. Every image was a reminder that this town survived by telling itself stories about the future. When I stepped outside, the wind cut through my jacket. The sky had darkened, clouds rolling in from the ocean, low and heavy. I sat in my car for a moment before turning the key, hands resting on the steering wheel, replaying the conversation in my head. The mayor had never raised his voice. He did not need to. Pressure did not always arrive as a threat. Sometimes it arrived as concern. By the time I reached the motel, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Missed calls, messages, numbers I did not recognize, and a few I did. I did not open them right away. I knew what they would say. They would tell me to slow down, to be reasonable, to think about consequences. I checked in with my regional supervisor instead. I called her directly, stepping out onto the narrow balcony outside my room, the sound of traffic filling the pauses between our words. I issued a partial stop order, I said. Air quality readings are exceeding safe limits, and the raw data does not match the submitted reports. There was a long silence on the other end. I imagined her flipping through files, already calculating the fallout. That is a serious move, she said finally. It is a necessary one. You realize what this will trigger, she said. Media attention, political calls, reviews of your conduct. I realize, I said. But the data is solid. She exhaled. Send me everything you have, everything. I already am, I said. And there is something else. I have reason to believe the environmental data was altered before submission. End quote. Another pause. Longer this time. That is an accusation, she said carefully. It is a finding, I replied. When the call ended, the sky had opened up. Rain streaked across the parking lot, bouncing off asphalt in uneven patterns. I watched it for a while, then went back inside and finally opened the messages. The first was from Ethan. Please call me. We can fix this. The next was from a local number. You are hurting real people. Another followed almost immediately. My husband works there. Think about that. I closed the phone and set it face down on the table. That evening, I went out to eat, partly because I needed food and partly because hiding felt like surrender. The diner was busier than it had been that morning. Construction workers crowded the counter, their voices louder, their laughter edged with something sharp. When I walked in, a few heads turned. Someone whispered. I took a seat anyway. The waitress hesitated when she saw me. You want the usual? Yes, I said. She poured my coffee, but did not linger. I felt the shift in the room, subtle but unmistakable. I was no longer just a visitor. I was the person standing between this place and what it wanted. Halfway through my meal, a woman approached my table. She looked to be in her 30s, hair pulled back, hands clenched tight in front of her. My brother works on the site, she said without introduction. He has 3 kids. I nodded. I understand. As well in Finders. No, you do not, she said. If this stops, he is done. We are done. I am not trying to stop the project, I said. I am trying to make it safe. She laughed, short and bitter. Safe does not pay the mortgage. She walked away before I could respond. When I returned to the motel, the envelope taped to my door was gone. In its place was a note slipped under the door. We can make this easier for you. Inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, letting the tension drain out of my legs. This was the part no one prepared you for. Not the inspections or the regulations, but the way doing your job slowly turned you into a symbol, a target for every fear in the room. The next day, the pressure escalated. A local reporter called, asking for comment on rumors that the inspection had been politically motivated. I declined to speak. An email from the town council questioned whether I had disclosed all potential conflicts of interest. I replied with documentation. A voicemail from an unfamiliar voice suggested that my career had been built on cooperation, not confrontation. At the site, the partial shutdown had created a visible ripple. Crews reassigned, equipment idling. The taped monitor was replaced entirely, swapped for a new casing that reported clean readings. I photographed that too. Ethan avoided me when he could not argue with me. When we did cross paths, he looked exhausted, eyes rimmed red, like someone who had not slept. They are saying this is your fault, he said once, standing beside a row of silent trucks. That you came in looking for a reason to shut us down. I came in looking for the truth, I said. That is not how it feels, he replied. Late that afternoon, I received another text from the unknown number. "You have made your point. Do not take this further." I did not respond. Instead, I forwarded it to my supervisor and added it to the growing folder on my drive. That night, I sat in my room with the lights off, laptop open, scrolling through the environmental files again. Patterns emerged the longer I stared. Peaks smoothed out, spikes trimmed, entire data streams missing from the hours when workers were present. This was not sloppy. This was deliberate. At some point, I realized I was being watched. Not in the dramatic sense, but in the quiet way small towns observe outsiders. When I stepped outside for air, a car idled across the lot. When I drove into town, the same truck seemed to appear in my rearview mirror more than once. It was probably coincidence. Probably. On the fourth day, the mayor called again. "You are dividing this community," he said. "I am not," I replied. "The truth is," he sighed, "you have to live with these people when you leave." End quote. I thought of the woman in the diner, of the worker who collapsed, of the monitor blinking red beneath tape. "So do they," I said. When the call ended, I knew something had shifted. The polite concern was gone. What remained was irritation, impatience. That evening, as I was packing up notes, there was a knock at my door. I froze, then approached slowly. Ethan stood outside, rain-soaked, shoulders slumped. "They are going to override you," he said. "Push it through at the state level. Call it a technical dispute." I studied his face. "And you are telling me this because?" "Because I cannot pretend anymore," he said. "People are getting sick, and I helped hide it." The admission hung between us, heavy and fragile. "Come in," I said. As he stepped inside, I realized this was no longer about stopping a project or signing a report. It was about how far the damage already went, and whether telling the truth now would cost more than lying ever had. And for the first time since I arrived in Harbor Point, I wondered if doing the right thing would leave anything standing at all. Ethan sat on the edge of the motel chair like he did not trust it to hold him. Rain dripped from the hem of his jacket onto the carpet, forming a dark, uneven stain. He kept rubbing his hands together, as if he were trying to wash something off that water could not reach. "I did not plan it," he said. At first, I did not interrupt. I poured 2 cups of coffee from the machine by the sink, slid one toward him, and waited. "When the readings first spiked, the consultants told us it was temporary," he continued. "They said it happens when you cut into old ground, pockets of gas, harmless if you keep moving." "And when it did not stop?" I asked. He swallowed. "They said the numbers would scare people who did not understand them. Investors. Inspectors. So they smoothed the data." "Who did?" He hesitated. "The environmental firm, with the blessing of people higher up. Higher than you." "Yes." A hard no. I took my notebook from the desk and opened it, not to intimidate him, but to give his words somewhere to land. "How long has this been going on?" "Since before you arrived," he said. "Weeks. Maybe longer." "And the workers?" "They complained," he said. "Headaches, nausea. They were told to drink more water. Take breaks." I wrote steadily, my pen scratching softly in the quiet room. "Why come to me now?" I asked. He looked up, eyes red. "Because that woman yesterday is in the hospital. And because I saw the look on your face when you peeled the tape back. You are not like the others." I closed the notebook. "If you are going to help me, you need to understand something," I said. "This will not end quietly." He nodded. "I know." I asked him to start from the beginning. Names, dates, meetings. Every time someone told him to look the other way. Every time he told himself it was temporary. He spoke for nearly an hour, his voice growing steadier as the weight shifted from his chest to the floor between us. When he finished, I handed him a pen. "Write a statement," I said. "In your own words." "Will it matter?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Later." He wrote slowly, shoulders hunched, pausing often to think. When he was done, I scanned the pages and photographed them, then saved copies to my drive. "What happens to me?" he asked. "I do not know," I said honestly. but lying will not make it better. After he left, I sat alone in the dim room, the rain easing into a steady drizzle. I replayed his words, lining them up with the data I had already seen. The picture sharpened. This was no longer circumstantial. It was systemic. The next morning, I returned to the site with a different purpose. I did not announce myself. I walked the perimeter, camera in hand, documenting changes, new monitors, fresh casings, clean readings, too clean. I spoke quietly with workers when supervisors were not around. I did not ask leading questions. I asked how they felt at the end of the day. I asked how often people took sick leave. I asked who decided when breaks happened. Patterns emerged. One man told me he stopped bringing lunch because food made him nauseous on site. Another joked that everyone felt better on rainy days. A third mentioned that the worst headaches happened near the Western Foundation, closest to the bluff. I wrote it all down. By midday, I had enough to justify a broader shutdown, enough to trigger a formal investigation, enough to ruin Harbor Point, if that was how you wanted to see it. My supervisor called just after noon. "We received your files," she said, "including the messages." "And?" I asked. "And they raise serious concerns," she said. "But the state is pushing back. Hard." I leaned against a steel beam, watching a crane freeze mid-turn. "What does that mean?" "It means they are framing this as a dispute over methodology," she said. "They want a third-party review." "A friendly one," I said. "Yes." I closed my eyes. "And the altered data? They are claiming it was a formatting error. Do you believe that?" "No," she said. "But belief is not the same as proof." I thought of Ethan's statement, of the workers' stories, of the monitor blinking red under tape. "I have more," I said. "Eyewitness accounts, patterns of illness." There was a pause. "Send everything," she said. "But you need to be careful. They are asking questions about you now." "What kind of questions?" "Why you were assigned this site. Whether you have a personal connection to the town." I laughed softly. "I grew up 2 counties over." "That may not matter," she said. "They are looking for leverage." After the call, I drove back to the motel and packed my things. Not to leave, but to be ready. Experience had taught me that when pressure built, it often came with sudden requests, meetings, transfers, administrative holds. That afternoon, a black SUV pulled into the motel lot. 2 men got out, suits too nice for the weather. They knocked on my door. "Miss Carter," one said when I opened it. "We are with the State Review Board." I invited them in. They asked polite questions about my process, my training, my interpretation of the data. They nodded a lot, took notes, smiled. At the end, one of them leaned forward. "You understand that a shutdown of this magnitude has consequences." "I do," I said. "Are you prepared to take responsibility for them?" "I already have," I said. They exchanged a glance. When they left, I sat on the bed and stared at the wall. My phone buzzed again. "Unknown number. This can still be resolved." I did not reply. That evening, I reviewed everything one more time. I created a timeline. Who knew what and when? Who benefited? Who got sick? It was all there, laid out cleanly. Damning if anyone chose to look. I uploaded the full file set to a secure federal server and requested a formal escalation. Then I did something I had never done before. I drafted a separate package. Photos, videos, statements, context. I did not send it yet. I saved it, labeled clearly, and set it aside. The next day, the decision came down. The State Review Board would assume authority. The partial stop order would be lifted pending further analysis. Work could resume. I stood on the bluff and watched the cranes start moving again. Workers returned to their positions. The new monitors blinked green. Ethan texted me once. "They are back at it," I replied. "I know." That night, as the town lit up with relief, I sat alone and looked at the second package on my laptop, the one not meant for official channels. I understood now what Harbor Point had been trying to tell me since the day I arrived. The system could absorb a certain amount of truth, as long as it did not threaten momentum. Beyond that, truth became a problem to be managed. I closed the laptop without sending anything. Not yet. The man who taught me this job once told me that inspections were never really about concrete or steel. They were about timing, about knowing when to speak, and when silence became complicity. As the sound of construction carried through the night, I realized I was approaching that line faster than I had expected. And once I crossed it, there would be no way back. The morning after the state lifted the stop order, Harbor Point woke up lighter. You could feel it in the way people moved, shoulders less tense, voices louder. Trucks rolled back onto the site before sunrise. By the time I arrived, the cranes were already in motion, steel swinging through the air like nothing had ever happened. I stood at the edge of the bluff and watched for a long time without speaking. The ocean below was rough, waves crashing against the rocks with a steady violence that felt honest, at least. The site above it was quieter in a different way, purposeful, determined, as if everyone had agreed to forget the last few days. Ethan did not meet me at the entrance this time. A different coordinator handed me a hard hat and nodded without introducing himself. No smiles, no explanations, just procedure. I walked straight to the Western Foundation. The new monitor was still there, its casing shiny, its screen glowing green. I knew better now than to trust it at face value. I knelt, pretended to adjust my boot, and glanced behind the housing. The wiring was new, recently installed, routed away from the original intake point. Someone had not just replaced the monitor, they had moved it. I stood slowly and felt something settle in my chest, heavy and unmistakable. This was the line, the moment where plausible deniability ended and intent began. I took photos anyway. Wide shots, close-ups, serial numbers. The relocation was subtle enough that most people would never notice, but it mattered. It meant they were not trying to measure the risk anymore. They were trying to avoid it. When I turned around, I found Ethan watching me from a distance. He looked thinner than he had a few days ago, his face drawn, eyes ringed with exhaustion. When I approached, he did not step away. "They told me to stop talking to you," he said. "Are you going to?" I asked. He shook his head. "I already chose." We walked toward the far end of the site, away from the noise. The wind carried the smell of the ocean mixed with something sharp and metallic. "They blamed the consultants," he said. "Said the altered data was outside their knowledge. Fired the firm. Hired a new one overnight." "And you?" I asked. "They offered me a promotion," he said quietly. "More money. A title. If I signed a statement saying I never saw unsafe conditions." I stopped walking. "Did you?" He met my eyes. "No." I nodded once. "That matters." "It does not feel like it," he said. "Everyone else signed." That was the betrayal I had not been ready for. Not Ethan's, but the quiet, collective one. People I had spoken to, men who joked about headaches, supervisors who nodded sympathetically. They had chosen stability over truth, one signature at a time. Later that day, I was called into a conference room at the temporary site office. The mayor was there. 2 representatives from the State Review Board. A man I had not met before, introduced as legal counsel for the development group. They invited me to sit. I did not. "We are concerned about your continued presence on site," the lawyer said, folding his hands on the table. "Given the state's decision, your role here is effectively complete." "I am still the assigned inspector," I said. "For now," he replied. "But there are discussions underway." Mayor Collins leaned forward. "This does not need to be adversarial," he said. "We respect your diligence. But you have to understand when to step back." "Step back from what?" I asked. "From falsified data? From people getting sick?" The state representative cleared his throat. "There is no confirmed link between site conditions and reported symptoms." "Because you moved the monitors," I said. The room went quiet. "That is a serious allegation," the lawyer said. "So is ignoring it," I replied. He smiled thinly. "Be careful." I left the meeting knowing exactly what that meant. By the end of the week, the decision came down. My assignment was terminated early. Officially, it was a routine reassignment due to overlapping jurisdictions. Unofficially, I had outlived my usefulness. My supervisor called me that night. Her voice was tired. "I fought it," she said, but they have the authority." End quote. Right now, I understand, I said, and I did. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I looked at the secure drive on my desk. At the second package I had not sent. "I do not know yet," I said, "but I am not done." After the call, I sat alone in the motel room, listening to the familiar hum of traffic. I thought about my career, about the quiet pride I used to feel doing work no one noticed unless something went wrong, about how easy it would be to pack up, file my report, and move on to the next assignment. That was what the system expected. That was how it survived. Ethan knocked on my door just before midnight. "They are increasing shifts," he said, pouring concrete faster, trying to seal everything in. "Do the workers know?" I asked. "Some do," he said. "They are scared. But they need the money." I handed him a folder. "These are copies of everything," I said. "If anything happens to me, you take them to the Federal Safety Office in Sacramento." His eyes widened. "What are you planning?" "I am planning for reality," I said. The next morning, I checked out of the motel. As I loaded my car, I noticed the black SUV again, parked across the lot. The same one. The men inside did not get out. They did not need to. I drove away from Harbor Point with the ocean at my side, the construction site shrinking in my mirror. Officially, my involvement was over. No badge, no authority, no protection. But as the miles passed, something else became clear. The rules I had followed my entire career were designed for problems that wanted to be solved. This one did not. It wanted to be buried, pored over, forgotten. By the time I reached the highway, my phone buzzed with a final message from the unknown number. "You did what you could. Let it go." I did not respond. Instead, I pulled over at the first rest stop, opened my laptop, and stared at the second package one more time. The one that did not belong to any agency. The one that would not protect me. I understood now what choosing truth really meant. It did not come with a badge or a process. It came with consequences, and often with isolation. If I sent that package, I would lose more than an assignment. I would lose my career, my credibility, the quiet life I had built on doing just enough. I closed my eyes and thought of the woman who collapsed, of the man who trembled by the pit, of the monitor blinking red beneath tape. I hit save. Not send. Not yet. But for the first time since I arrived in Harbor Point, I stopped pretending that walking away was still an option. I spent the night at a rest stop outside the city, sleeping in short, shallow stretches. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the monitor blinking red, the tape pulled tight across it like a blindfold. By dawn, I gave up on sleep entirely and drove inland, away from the coast, until the air felt drier and the sky opened up. There was a small public library in a town I had never visited before. I parked under a eucalyptus tree and went inside with my laptop and the external drive tucked into my bag. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned. An older woman sat at the front desk, knitting. She glanced up, smiled, and went back to counting stitches. I chose a table near the back and spread my materials out like a puzzle. Photos, videos, statements, data files. I was not looking for new information. I was looking for clarity. When I laid everything out end to end, a pattern emerged that had nothing to do with readings or regulations. It was about timing. Every spike coincided with a push to accelerate construction. Every complaint was followed by a personnel shift. Every document that raised a question was answered by a replacement, not a correction. The project was not being built around a risk. It was being built to outrun it. I pulled up the geological survey maps I had reviewed weeks earlier, the ones that had seemed marginal but acceptable at the time. With fresh eyes, they looked different. The Western Foundation sat closer to an old fault line than I had realized. Not an active one, not enough to stop a project outright, but enough to matter when combined with unstable gas pockets and accelerated load-bearing. This was the realization that landed hardest. If the project failed, it would not fail quickly. It would not fail in a way that could be blamed on a single decision or person. It would fail years later, after the ribbon cuttings, after the investors moved on, after the people who made the choices retired or relocated. It would fail when no one was looking. I closed my laptop and stared at the table. This was the kind of danger that systems were terrible at handling. Too slow, too diffuse, too inconvenient. By midday, my phone rang. My supervisor again. "I wanted you to hear this from me," she said. "There is talk of opening a formal review into your conduct." I let that settle. On what grounds? Exceeding authority, failure to maintain professional neutrality, potential bias. "Because I would not sign," I said. "Yes," she said, "and because they are under pressure to make this go away." I nodded even though she could not see me. "What happens now?" "Nothing yet," she said, "but I need to be honest with you. If this escalates, I cannot protect you." "I did not ask you to," I said. She hesitated. "I am proud of you," she said quietly, "but pride does not stop consequences." After the call, I sat for a long time without moving. Around me, people came and went. Students, parents, retirees reading newspapers. Life continuing the way it always did, indifferent to buried risks. In the late afternoon, I drove back toward the coast, not to Harbor Point, but to the hospital where the young woman had been taken. I had avoided it before, afraid of crossing a line. Now, I understood that line had already been erased. The nurse at the desk frowned when I asked for information, but she softened when I explained who I was. She could not give me details, but she confirmed enough. Respiratory irritation. Elevated levels of exposure. More than one case. "Do you think it came from the site?" I asked. She looked around, then lowered her voice. "We are not supposed to speculate," she said, "but we have seen an uptick." That was all I needed. That evening, I sat in my car overlooking the water, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Harbor Point glowed in the distance, cranes silhouetted against the orange sky. It looked peaceful, productive, successful. I thought about the second package again, the one meant for journalists, not regulators. The one that would take this out of controlled channels and into public view. I had always believed that exposure was a last resort, a blunt tool. It could do as much harm as good if used carelessly. But what I was facing now was not a system failing to act. It was a system actively choosing silence. That was the moment something in me shifted. Not anger, not fear, acceptance. I understood that if I sent the package, I would not be able to control what happened next. The narrative would not belong to me. People would be hurt. People would be angry. And yes, people would lose jobs. But if I did nothing, the damage would simply be delayed, buried under concrete and profit until it became irreversible. The choice was no longer between right and wrong. It was between visible harm now and invisible harm later. I opened my laptop in the car, the screen glowing in the dark. I began drafting a cover letter, not to defend myself, but to explain the stakes in plain language. No accusations, no emotional appeals, just facts, timelines, patterns. Halfway through, my phone buzzed. "Ethan." They moved the pour schedule up again. Night shifts now. People are coughing. I closed my eyes. "Are you safe?" I texted back. "For now." I looked at the blinking cursor on the screen. This was the point of no return. Not because of what it would do to the project, but because of what it would do to me. Once this was public, I would be labeled difficult, disloyal, unprofessional. No agency would want to touch me again. Years of quiet service reduced to a cautionary tale. I saved the draft and shut the laptop without sending it. Not because I was backing down, because I needed to be precise. That night, I checked into a small inn farther up the coast. I slept deeply for the first time in days, exhaustion finally winning. In my dreams, the ocean rose slowly, not as a wave, but as a tide, creeping forward inch by inch. In the morning, I woke with a strange calm. The fear was still there, but it no longer dictated my movements. I knew what I had to do. I just had to do it in a way that could not be undone or dismissed. I spent the day verifying one last thing. I cross-referenced hospital admissions with shift schedules. I matched wind patterns to exposure reports. I confirmed the fault line proximity again, this time with an independent geologist who owed me a favor and asked no questions. By sunset, There were no gaps left to fill. I stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking the sea and felt the weight of the decision settle fully into my body. This was not about stopping a project anymore. It was about interrupting a lie that had grown too comfortable to question. When I got back to my room, I opened the second package again. This time, I did not hesitate. I added one more document to the folder. A personal statement, not dramatic, not defensive, just a record of what I had seen and why I could not ignore it. Then I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the distant sound of waves. Tomorrow, I would choose, and whatever I chose would end the life I had known, one way or another. I woke before the alarm, the room still dark, the sound of the ocean muted by distance. For a few seconds, I lay still, letting the weight of the previous day press down on me. Then I sat up, reached for my laptop, and opened the folder I had been avoiding naming. Inside were weeks of work condensed into files and folders. Evidence does not feel dramatic when you are collecting it. It feels dull, repetitive. A grind of screenshots, timestamps, statements. Only later does it take on the shape of a story, and by then, it is too late to pretend it is not yours. I made coffee and sat at the small desk by the window. Outside, a delivery truck idled, its engine rattling, then drove off. Normal sounds, normal life. I wondered how many times I had relied on that normalcy to keep myself from acting sooner. I read through the package one last time, not to second-guess the facts, but to check the order. The first document explained the site layout and why the Western Foundation mattered. The next showed the raw monitor readings compared against the altered submissions. Then came photos, videos, statements. Ethan's declaration. Worker accounts. Anonymized but consistent. Hospital confirmation of exposure patterns. Geological overlays. Wind data. At the end, my statement. 3 pages. Plain language, no accusations, just what I saw, what I verified, and why it mattered now rather than later. I did not include my feelings. Feelings gave people something to argue with. At 7:30, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it ring out. A minute later, a text followed. "We know what you are considering. Do not do this." I took a screenshot and saved it. The decision did not feel brave. It felt inevitable, like stepping onto a moving walkway you had been standing next to for too long. I opened my email and drafted a short message to 3 investigative reporters I trusted. People who had handled infrastructure cases before, who knew how to verify before publishing, who did not rush to print rumors. The message was simple. I have verified documentation regarding ongoing public safety risks at a major coastal construction project. Regulatory channels have failed to address it. If you are interested, I can provide full evidence. I attached nothing. I hit send. For a few minutes, nothing happened. I sat there, hands wrapped around my coffee mug, watching steam curl into the air. Then replies began to come in. Cautious, curious, professional. Can you outline the scope? What is your role? Is anyone in immediate danger? I answered each one carefully. No embellishment, no speculation, facts only. By 9, one of them asked for the files. I hesitated. This was the point of no return. Not legally, not yet, but personally. Once I shared the package, I could not control where it went or how it was used. I thought of my supervisor's voice, of the review board's smiles, of the monitor blinking red beneath tape. I sent the files. The confirmation ping felt louder than it should have. Within an hour, my phone started ringing again. This time, numbers were no longer hidden. A representative from the development group left a voicemail, his tone polite but tight, asking for a call to clarify misunderstandings. A state official emailed, requesting that I refrain from further disclosures while an internal review was pending. My supervisor called twice. I did not answer. At noon, Ethan texted. They shut down the west section. Temporarily. People are being told it is weather-related. I closed my eyes and exhaled. Temporary was more than nothing. By early afternoon, rumors were already circulating online. Nothing concrete, just whispers. A post here, a comment there, a photo of workers in masks. Someone asking why the project was pouring at night. I drove to a lookout point above Harbor Point and parked. From there, I could see the site clearly. Activity had slowed. Trucks clustered near the center, engines off. A group of workers stood talking, helmets off, faces turned toward the ocean rather than the ground. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was my supervisor. "You should have told me," she said, skipping any greeting. "I did," I replied. "I sent everything." "It's better. You went outside the process." There was no process left. She was quiet for a moment. "They are opening a formal inquiry," she said, "and an internal review into your conduct." I expected that. "They will likely suspend you pending the outcome." "I understand," she sighed. "You realize they will paint you as unstable." "Yes. And the town," she continued. "They will be furious." "I know." Another pause. "I wish it did not come to this." "So do I." End quote. When the call ended, I felt something loosen in my chest. The worst part was over. The waiting, the pretending that there was still a safe way through. By evening, the first reporter called. "We have verified enough to proceed," she said. "Not with conclusions, with questions." "That is all I want," I said. The story broke the next morning. It was not explosive, not yet. A measured piece outlining concerns about environmental data discrepancies at a major coastal development. Quotes from unnamed sources. Statements from officials assuring the public that safety was a priority. Harbor Point woke up to cameras. By noon, the site was officially paused pending review. The mayor held a press conference, standing in front of the familiar banner, his words careful, controlled. He spoke of cooperation, of transparency, of commitment to the community. I watched it on a small television in a cafe miles away. No one recognized me. That felt like mercy. The backlash came later. Emails flooded in, some supportive, many angry. Accusations, threats thinly disguised as advice. I stopped reading after the first 100. My agency placed me on administrative leave by the end of the day. My badge was deactivated, my access revoked. The email was brief, procedural, almost kind. I forwarded it to my personal account and closed my work laptop for the last time. That night I called my mother. I had not planned to. "They are saying things about you," she said gently. "I know. Are you okay?" I looked around the quiet room, the packed bag by the door, the laptop on the desk, the ocean a distant sound. "I will be," I said, and I meant it in a way I had not earlier. Over the next few days, the story grew. More workers came forward. A second hospital confirmed additional cases. An independent geologist published a cautious but concerning analysis. The narrative shifted from rumor to pattern, and with it, the pressure intensified. A letter from the state arrived, informing me that my certification was under review. A former colleague texted to say I had been labeled difficult. A friend asked if it was worth it. I did not answer that question right away. On the 5th day, Ethan called. "They let us go," he said. "Whole crew. Indefinite." "I am sorry," I said. "Do not be," he replied. "They cannot pretend anymore." Ender. We cub to save and dage. Ender. After the call, I walked down to the beach and let the cold water soak my shoes. I watched the waves roll in and out, steady and indifferent. The ocean did not care about projects or jobs or reputations. It cared about pressure and release, about what happened when you ignored forces for too long. I understood now that this was the real cost, not the loss of my career, not the anger of a town, but the knowledge that doing the right thing did not come with clean outcomes. It came with damage you could not fully control. As the sun dipped low, my phone buzzed one last time. Unknown number. "You think you won. You did not." I saved the message and slipped the phone into my pocket. I had not done this to win. I had done it to stop something worse. And even if everything that followed stripped me down to nothing but that truth, I knew I could live with it. The first public meeting was scheduled for a Thursday night in the high school gym. I found out about it the same way everyone else did, through a blurry flyer posted online and shared hundreds of times within an hour. Community Safety Forum, Harbor Point Renewal Project. All are welcome. I almost did not go. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew exactly what it would become. A place where fear looked for a face to sit on. Still, I went. Hiding would only confirm the version of me they had already started inventing. I parked 3 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance. The gym was lit up like a stadium, cars lining the streets, people spilling onto the sidewalks. I recognized faces from the diner, the harbor, the site. People who had smiled at me days ago now avoided my eyes. Inside, folding chairs filled the floor. A long table stood at the front, draped in a blue cloth, microphones lined up like weapons. The mayor sat in the center, flanked by council members, state representatives, and a man I recognized as the developer's legal counsel. A large screen behind them displayed the project logo. I took a seat near the back. The meeting opened with polite words: transparency, concern, commitment. The mayor spoke calmly, emphasizing that the project was paused out of an abundance of caution. The state representative assured everyone that experts were reviewing the data. The lawyer reminded the crowd that no conclusions had been reached. Then the questions started. A man stood up and shouted that his mortgage depended on this project. A woman cried as she talked about moving her parents back into her house if her job disappeared. Someone yelled that the media was exaggerating everything, and then someone said my name. All heads turned. I felt it like a physical push, the sudden heat of attention. I stood slowly, not because I owed anyone anything, but because sitting felt like surrender. "I am here," I said, my voice steady. "If you want to ask me something, you can." A murmur ran through the room. The mayor raised his hands. "Let us keep this respectful." A man in the second row stood up. "Are you the inspector who shut us down?" "I am the inspector who reported unsafe conditions," I replied. "You do not live here," he said. "You do not know us." "You are right," I said. "I do not live here, but I do know what I saw." Another voice cut in. "You ruined this town." I shook my head. "I did not create the risk." A woman near the aisle stood, her voice shaking. "My husband is sick. He worked the west section." The room went quiet. She looked at the panel, not at me. "You told us it was safe." The lawyer leaned toward his microphone. "There is no confirmed link. My husband cannot breathe without a machine," she said. "So you can keep your confirmations." And courted. People started talking all at once. Anger shifted direction, bouncing around the room like a loose wire. The mayor tried to regain control. The state representative whispered to him. The screen behind them flickered, briefly showing a paused image of the construction site. I sat back down, heart pounding. This was not about me anymore. It never really had been. After 2 hours, the meeting ended without resolution. Promises of further investigation, assurances of updates. People filed out slowly, talking in low, urgent voices. Outside, the night air was cold. Someone spat near my feet as they passed. Someone else muttered, "Thank you." The contrast felt unreal. I walked back to my car alone. The next morning, the state released a preliminary statement. No immediate danger, but additional testing required. The developer announced cooperation. The mayor called for unity. The project remained paused. The pressure shifted again. A lawyer contacted me on behalf of a group of workers, asking if I would testify. A different lawyer contacted me on behalf of the developer, warning me about defamation. My agency sent a formal notice outlining the scope of my internal review. I did not respond right away. Instead, I drove back to the rest stop where this had started. I sat at the same picnic table, the same view of passing cars, and opened my notebook. I wrote down everything I could no longer change. The project might resume. The town might never forgive me. My career was likely over. Then I wrote down what I had changed. The west section was sealed off. Workers were being tested. Data was being reviewed publicly instead of buried. That list was shorter, but it mattered. That afternoon, I received an email from one of the reporters. We obtained internal emails from the environmental firm. They referenced deliberate data adjustment to avoid triggering shutdown thresholds. I stared at the screen. This was the moment people thought they wanted. The smoking gun. The thing that turned uncertainty into outrage. The article went live an hour later. This time, The reaction was immediate. National outlets picked it up. Regulatory agencies announced parallel investigations. The developer's stock dipped. The mayor canceled his next press appearance. Harbor Point was no longer a local story. That night, I received a message from the unknown number I had come to expect. You crossed a line you cannot step back over. I did not save it this time. I deleted it. 2 days later, the state announced a full suspension of the project pending comprehensive review. Crews were laid off. Equipment was locked down. The site fell silent. The town erupted. Protests formed near the harbor. Signs went up. Some blamed the developer. Others blamed me. Someone spray-painted my last name on a wall near the diner. I watched it all from a distance. My role reduced to a footnote in headlines and arguments I could no longer influence. My internal review concluded the following week. The letter arrived by certified mail. It cited procedural violations, failure to maintain chain of command, unauthorized disclosure of information. It recommended revocation of my certification. I read it once, then set it down. I did not appeal. I knew what an appeal would look like. Months of hearings, more scrutiny, more opportunities for the story to be twisted. I was tired. I returned my badge in person. The receptionist did not meet my eyes. On my way out, my supervisor stopped me in the hallway. She hugged me without saying a word. "I am sorry," she said finally. "I am not," I replied. And I meant that too. That evening, I packed my car again. Not to run, but to move on. I had no assignment waiting, no plan beyond distance. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Independent review confirms elevated exposure risk at Harbor Point site. Long-term structural concerns under investigation. I pulled over and read it twice. The road ahead was empty, stretching out under a pale sky. I merged back onto it slowly, the weight of everything settling into something quieter, heavier. The truth was out now. What it would cost, and who would pay it, was no longer up to me. And for the first time since this began, that was enough. The day after the state announced the full suspension, Harbor Point felt hollow. That was the word that kept coming back to me. Not angry, not grieving. Hollow, like a room after the furniture has been dragged out, the marks still visible on the floor. I did not go back into town. I stayed on the edge of it, in a rented room above a closed bait shop, watching the news cycle chew through the story. Every outlet wanted a villain and a hero. The developer's spokesperson tried to flatten everything into technical language. The mayor talked about betrayal. The reporters spoke in careful phrases, but the comment sections did not. People wanted a win. They wanted handcuffs, resignations, a clean ending where someone paid and everyone else could move on. That was not what happened. Instead, the investigation widened. Slowly, methodically, agencies that never spoke to each other started asking the same questions. Consultants stopped returning calls. Internal emails leaked in batches, not as one explosive dump, but as a steady drip that kept the story alive longer than anyone wanted. And then something unexpected happened. The state issued a statement saying that, based on preliminary findings, the project might eventually resume if mitigation measures were implemented and timelines adjusted. The language was vague, but the message was clear. This was not over. It was being reshaped. I read the statement twice, then closed my laptop. This was the moment people assumed would feel like victory. It did not. It felt like a warning. If the project resumed under a new set of rules, the danger would not disappear. It would just be redistributed, managed, turned into acceptable risk. The kind that passed reviews because it no longer looked urgent. I knew that pattern too well. That afternoon, one of the reporters called me again. "They want a follow-up," she said. "Your reaction to the suspension, to the possibility of the project restarting." "What would you like me to say?" I asked. "That this is not enough," she said. "That you will keep fighting." I looked out the window at the empty street below. "That would not be honest." She paused. "What do you mean?" "I am not going to fight this," I said. There was a silence on the line, the kind that came when someone realized the story they wanted was slipping away. "You exposed it," she said. "You cannot just walk away now." "I can," I said. And I will. She tried again. People see you as the conscience in this. I almost laughed. Conscience does not make decisions, I said. People do. When the call ended, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not relieved, just clear. That night, I wrote a letter. Not to an agency. Not to the press. To the independent review panel overseeing the project. It was short. Direct. I outlined one thing only. The long-term structural risk created by building on compromised ground while accelerating timelines to meet financial pressure. No blame, no demands, just a conclusion. If you continue, do it slowly. If you cannot do it slowly, do not do it here. I attached nothing else. They already had everything. I sent it, then shut my laptop and did not open it again that night. The backlash came anyway. Opinion pieces accused me of abandoning the community when things got hard. Others said I had done enough damage already and should disappear. A radio host suggested I enjoyed the attention. A former colleague emailed to say I had set a dangerous precedent. I did not respond to any of it. Instead, I packed. Not in a dramatic way. Just boxes, clothes, books. The external drive went into a drawer I did not plan to open again anytime soon. I left Harbor Point without announcing it, driving inland until the ocean smell faded completely. Weeks passed. The investigation continued. Quietly. The project remained stalled, but not canceled. The town fractured into camps. Some people moved away. Others stayed and waited. My certification was officially revoked. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. No ceremony, no anger, just a conclusion. I placed it in a folder and slid it onto a shelf with old tax documents and expired warranties. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Without the badge, the emails stopped. The calls dried up. I became less useful as a symbol. The world moved on to the next outrage. I took a temporary job consulting for a small engineering firm in a different state. Nothing high profile. Reviewing plans, teaching junior staff how to read data without assuming it was honest. I did not put Harbor Point on my resume. One afternoon, months later, I received a message from Ethan. They decided not to restart. Not here. I read it twice. Why? I typed back. No one would insure it. Too many unknowns. Too much attention. I stared at the screen for a long time. What about you? I am working inland now. Slower projects. Safer ones. Good, I wrote. After that, there were no more updates. Years from now, someone will probably point to Harbor Point as an example of oversight, of delay, of lost opportunity, or maybe as a case study in cautious planning. I will not be cited. My name will not be attached to a policy or a reform. That used to bother me. Now it does not. I understand something I did not before, that stopping a bad outcome does not always look like winning. Sometimes it looks like leaving before the damage finds a new shape. Sometimes it looks like refusing to turn yourself into a mascot for a fight that no longer needs you. I did not stay to watch what Harbor Point became. I did not stand on a stage or give a speech about integrity. I did not rebuild anything. I stepped away. And in doing so, I took the only thing that still belonged to me, the choice not to trade one kind of harm for another. People still ask if I would do it again. I tell them the truth. I would do the work again. I would gather the facts. I would say what I saw, but I would not stay to be applauded or punished for it. Because the most dangerous lie I encountered in Harbor Point was not in the data, it was the idea that justice always needs a face. Sometimes, the right ending is not a victory. Sometimes, it is simply knowing when to stop. Life after Harbor Point did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces, small and ordinary, the way most real changes do. There was no dramatic fall. No single morning where I woke up and realized everything was different. Instead, there were quiet adjustments that added up until the old version of my life no longer fit. The consulting job paid enough. Not what I used to make, but enough to cover rent and groceries and the occasional dinner out. I worked from a shared office 2 days a week, and from home the rest of the time. My days were filled with drawings, specifications, and junior engineers who wanted clear answers. I gave them what I could. I taught them how to read a report and then read past it. how to look for what was missing, not just what was highlighted. They listened. That surprised me. Sometimes, late in the afternoon, one of them would ask why I left my previous role. I kept the answer simple. It stopped being honest, I said. Most of them nodded without pressing. A few looked disappointed, like they wanted a better story. I did not give them one. Harbor Point still appeared in the news from time to time. Smaller headlines now, updates buried under larger stories, environmental assessments ongoing, negotiations stalled, town council elections heated. I skimmed them without clicking most days. I did not need the details anymore. The shape of the outcome was clear enough. What I did not expect was the way people from Harbor Point would slowly start reaching out. It began with one email from a woman I did not recognize. She said her husband had worked night shifts on the west section and had been sick for months. She said the doctors never put it in writing, but they all knew. She thanked me for saying something when no one else would. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. When I did, I kept it short. I told her I was glad her husband was getting care. I did not apologize. I did not take credit. More messages followed over the next few weeks. A former worker who had moved inland and found a different job. A teacher who had lost a part-time position tied to the project but said she slept better knowing the truth. A young man who admitted he had yelled at me during the public meeting and wanted me to know he was sorry. I did not respond to all of them. Not because I did not care, but because I did not want to turn their processing into my responsibility. Everyone had their own reckoning. Mine was already underway. The hardest messages were the ones filled with anger. You ruined us. You ran away. You never had to stay. Those I read once and deleted. On one quiet Sunday morning, months after everything ended, I received a call from my former supervisor. We had not spoken since my certification was revoked. I wanted to check in, she said. Off the record. I appreciate that, I replied. She hesitated. They closed the internal review. And? I asked. They acknowledged data manipulation, she said. No formal apologies, no reinstatements, but the record reflects it now. I let that sink in. Thank you for telling me. There is something else, she added. They are revising protocols, not because of you. They will never say that, but because of what happened. That is enough, I said. After the call, I sat at my kitchen table and looked out the window. A neighbor's dog barked. A delivery truck passed. Normal sounds, normal life. It struck me then how much of my old identity had been tied to being needed in a crisis, to being the person who stepped in when something went wrong. Now, nothing was wrong in any obvious way, and that was fine. One afternoon, while cleaning out a closet, I found the external drive I had tucked away months earlier. For a moment, I considered plugging it in, just to see, to remind myself of what I had done, what it had cost. I did not. Some records do not need revisiting. Their purpose is fulfilled the moment they force a change, however small. That winter, I was invited to speak at a small conference for engineering students. No press, no sponsors, just a classroom with folding chairs and a whiteboard. They asked me to talk about ethics in infrastructure. I stood in front of them and told them the truth. That ethics is not about choosing the perfect outcome. It is about choosing which consequences you are willing to live with, that sometimes the right decision will leave you without allies, titles, or clear endings. That doing your job well can mean knowing when your job no longer gives you leverage. One student raised her hand and asked if it was worth it. I thought about Harbor Point, about the silence that followed the noise, about the long, slow settling of a decision made without applause. Yes, I said, but not in the way you are imagining. Afterward, a young man approached me and said he had grown up in a town like Harbor Point. He said he had always assumed someone else would protect places like that. Someone should, he said. They do, I replied. Sometimes, but not always the way you expect. As spring approached, I stopped checking the news entirely. Harbor Point faded into the background of my life, no longer a wound or a victory, just a chapter. I learned to measure success differently, not by outcomes I could point to, but by lines I did not cross, by compromises I refused to make when they mattered most, by the quiet knowledge that, at one moment, I chose to interrupt a lie instead of benefiting from it. That knowledge did not make me happier. It made me steadier. There are days when I miss the authority, the clarity of having a badge and a defined role. There are days when I wonder what my career would look like now if I had signed the report and gone home. Then I remember the monitor blinking red, the tape, the way everyone pretended it was fine, and the wondering stops. I did not save Harbor Point. I did not destroy it either. I did not become a symbol or a cautionary tale worth repeating in training manuals. I became someone who did one thing, once, and then stepped aside. That is not a heroic ending, but it is an honest one. And honesty, I have learned, is not something you finish using. It is something you live with, quietly, long after the noise fades. 5 years after Harbor Point, I drove past the coast without meaning to. I had taken a wrong turn after a meeting inland, following a road that curved west instead of east. By the time I realized it, the air had changed. Salt, kelp, wind that never fully rests. I did not slow down at first. Muscle memory told me to keep moving, to treat that stretch of coastline like a bruise you do not press. But the road rose gently, and from the crest I could see the water spread out below, gray and patient. So I pulled over. There was a small turnout with room for 3 cars and a rusted trash bin. I parked and stepped out, letting the wind tug at my jacket. The ocean looked the same as it always had, indifferent, unimpressed by timelines and plans. I stood there for a while without thinking about Harbor Point at all. I thought about how my days looked now, about mornings that started quietly, about work that ended on time, about the absence of urgent emails and calls that demanded I fix something immediately. It took longer than I expected to realize that peace had crept up on me without asking permission. Eventually, my mind did what minds do and wandered back. I checked my phone, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see if the place still existed the way I remembered it. Harbor Point did not come up in the news anymore. No scandal, no revival story. Just a few zoning updates and a notice about the sale of a parcel of land near the bluff. I clicked on a satellite image. The site was still there, fenced, overgrown in places. The cranes were gone. The foundation outlines remained, pale lines against darker soil, like a half-erased drawing someone had abandoned. It was neither a ruin nor a success. It was simply unfinished. I closed the image and slipped the phone back into my pocket. For years, people had asked me how the story ended, as if there were a final scene they had missed. They wanted to know if the town recovered, if the people who pushed the project were punished, if I ever regretted walking away. I learned to answer that question differently, depending on who was asking. Sometimes I said I did not know. That was the simplest truth. Other times, when I felt generous, I said it ended the day I stopped needing it to end a certain way. Standing there by the road, I realized that was still true. The world does not tie off loose threads just because we want closure. It leaves things unresolved. It moves on. It builds elsewhere. It forgets names while keeping consequences. I got back into my car and drove away. This time, deliberately. I did not look in the mirror. Later that week, I received an email from a former student. She had taken a job with a small municipal agency and was struggling with her first major review. The data was confusing. The timelines were tight. People were already hinting that she should not make trouble. She asked me what to do. I did not send her a long response. I did not tell her a story. I told her this: read what is in front of you. Say what you see. Decide what you can live with afterward. She wrote back a day later to say thank you. That was enough. That night, I dreamed about the ocean again. Not rising, not threatening, just moving the way it always had, reshaping the shoreline grain by grain, indifferent to whether anyone noticed. When I woke up, I understood something I had not allowed myself to before. The reason Harbor Point stayed with me for so long was not because of what I lost there. It was because, for the first time in my life, I had chosen not to replace one lie with another. I had not told myself that exposure would fix everything. I had not told myself that sacrifice guaranteed redemption. I had done the work. I had told the truth, and then I had stepped back. That choice did not make me powerful. It made me free. There are people who believe that if you uncover something wrong, you are obligated to stay until it is made right. That you owe the outcome your presence, your voice, your career. I do not believe that anymore. Some truths do not need guardians. They need daylight. After that, they belong to everyone, and no one at once. I did not stay to argue with Harbor Point about what it should become. I did not stay to defend myself or demand recognition. I let the truth stand without me. That was the twist no one expected, least of all me. Not a triumph, not a collapse, a refusal. Years from now, someone may stand on that same bluff and decide to build again. Maybe they will do it carefully. Maybe they will make the same mistakes with better paperwork. Maybe they will look at the ground and choose another place. I will not be there to see it, and that is fine. Because the last thing Harbor Point taught me was this: justice does not always arrive with noise or punishment or neat resolutions. Sometimes it arrives as an interruption. Sometimes it arrives as a delay. And sometimes it arrives when someone walks away and refuses to lend their presence to a lie that wants to keep going. I did not win. I did not lose. I stopped. And in a world that measures worth by momentum, that may be the most honest ending I could have chosen.